Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started.
All right, everybody, welcome. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors, co-host of the show. Kevin, glad to be back with you here.
Yep, it's good to be on again, Tim.
And Kevin, we've been hearing about the December 11th deadline to get some new budget passed. Back in DC, there was some hope for stimulus to hit by the end of this week. There's been some challenges to that, both items this week. Can you explain a little bit about what's going on back in DC?
Yeah, the bipartisan effort was going on good. We heard from Governor Weiss last week. A lot of optimism. I'm always an optimist about these things. I think, I keep thinking we're going to get something. And then yesterday, the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell kind of threw a monkey wrench in everything by suggesting that we get beyond the two issues that are sticking points, which is state and local government assistance. That's a $160 billion component of the package. And the other issue that Republicans want, which is to deal with liability for COVID, that they want to try to give relief to businesses for. We actually need that for school districts as well. So he suggested they drop both of those issues in order to move a package forward, and Schumer just about imploded. He came out forcefully yesterday against any package that doesn't have a state and local component to it, and accused McConnell of sabotaging all the work that the bipartisan group of members of the Senate have been putting together. So that is a little scary in terms of, upending what has been a pretty remarkable bipartisan effort. So we've been optimistic so far, but you never doubt their ability to end up screwing things up on a real sensitive negotiation like this. So fingers crossed that they get this done. Obviously, the clock is ticking. The 11th is the date that they got to get something done. And I'm still thinking they probably pull it off. And if they do, it's really big for us because it's a combination in California. It's a combination of our share of that state and local government aid, if that stays in it, which I think it will. And one of the things that Governor Weiss did a little text to Tim and I today, that just this morning, real briefly, to say there is still no controversy whatsoever about the school aid. And that's a really reassuring thing. So if we can get a package done, we end up getting a pretty good infusion of money for education in California that'll carry us through to whatever it is that Biden ends up doing in his first quarter as president.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And again, we've if we missed this many deadlines, we wouldn't be in business, I believe. But here's the government still kind of missing deadlines. We hope they hit this one at the end of the week or whenever they resolve some of the issues that they have. So thanks for the update, and of course, we'll keep everyone posted. Another announcement from DC this week: the FCC, Ajit Pai, sort of came out in the media saying he's basically made the biggest difference for the digital divide in U.S. history. Basically talking about the $9 billion that was awarded to folks that had applied to help solve this digital divide problem in rural America. The issue is that $9 billion is not net new. It's the $16 billion that was pulled out of CARES to address the issue. And this $9 billion was specifically, set up sort of for people to compete for. So I guess it's not a new headline. It's kind of interesting to me that they're making such a big deal about it. And again, we're years away from seeing the impact of those dollars. So I will say that one of the most encouraging things that I saw from this announcement was that SpaceX was awarded $800 to $900 million. And for those of you who are not familiar with SpaceX, it's an Elon Musk company, the guy who did PayPal and Tesla. They basically have launched satellites to deliver internet. They've done a beta in like southern Canada and the northern US, and they actually have some really great numbers, for connectivity to homes where there are no cables running. And I will just say the $9 billion that's being spent, when they run fiber into the ground in these remote places, you're going to have to connect the house to those fiber lines. And that's what they call the last mile. The $9 billion does not address the last mile. So that brings me back to the fact that the FCC, who controls E-rate, still has not made a change to the E-rate program to allow us to use the dollars to connect people at home. And I don't see why they're making such a big deal about this headline, other than it's just sort of a nice way to pat a Jeep pie on the back on the way out the door. Forgive me for being a little jaded, but I am anxious to see something from the FCC that will address the digital divide around the nation, rural America, and places like LA and Oakland and other places where there are a lot of people who don't have connectivity. So I'll jump off my soapbox, Kevin, and talk a little bit about some of the states that are trying to solve these challenges. You've got South Carolina, Connecticut, places like Colorado. They're taking state level action to solve this challenge. And we got some encouraging news with the new legislative meetings this week. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the momentum you've seen to close the digital divide in California at that meeting?
Yeah, on technology, and I'll talk a little bit more about the reopening of the new legislative session in a second, but digital divide is going to be a major issue. I mean, nobody could have doubted for a minute that it wouldn't be one of the bigger issues the legislature would tackle this year, given the fact that connectivity and devices and all of those issues still challenge public education in the state. So there's a bunch of bills that got introduced on the first day of session this week when the legislature convened. One of those is a bill that we talked a lot about last year. Senator Lena Gonzalez has reintroduced her Broadband for All efforts. There's interestingly, Al Marzouchi has a Broadband for All bond measure that he's introduced that would go on the 2022 ballot. So that's back. And there are other legislators that are doing some stuff in the technology area as well. We're going to hear a lot more about this from the governor and the legislature as they, get going in January. What's notable, Tim, is that they come back for the beginning of the brand new 2-year legislative session in December for a single day, and they basically elect officers, which they did, and the same two leaders of the Senate and the Assembly that we've had, the Speaker and the Pro Tem, got reelected again, and they sort of appoint, some of the key, housekeeping duties that are done in each of the two houses. And then they usually have an opportunity to introduce bills. And more bills were introduced on this one day than we've seen on the first day of the last couple of sessions that have been where they do these kinds of activities. And of course, there are a lot around the issues that we care about. So I'll jump into that a little bit, which is that we've got legislation that would do facility bonds as well. We've got a Senator Steve Glazier school bond that also includes pre-K as well as some higher ed components to it. And then you also have, of course, O'Donnell jumping into the fray again, a bond measure that he would put. All of these bond measures, the Marzouchi tech bond, as well as these other facility bonds, would appear on the November 22 ballot. That would be an interesting ballot because that's also where I think CSB and AXA may be headed with regard to a major funding bill that would affect public education. Nothing on that yet other than their stated intent to do it. But anyways, a number of different pieces of legislation that are in the mix, and it was a good opening session that they had over at the basketball arena, the big NBA basketball arena, the Golden One, in order to accommodate social distancing. The assembly was there. The state Senate, with only 40 members, was over in their chamber in the state Capitol building, but again, spread out quite a bit. And then they had masks and those kinds of things, of course, but they also did not have children and families, which they typically do for the swearing in of new members. And the leadership just basically said, we're going to have to do that on another day when things get more normalized. So they basically just got down to business. But anyway, so the session formally kicks off now at the Capitol building, and they'll get underway in earnest in January. The major first thing we'll see in January is the introduction of the governor's brand new budget. We expect that on the 7th or the 8th of January, and then the legislature's got a lot of work ahead of them.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And I'll just say it's heartening to hear that there's multiple efforts to solve this digital divide issue in the state of California. And of course, looking forward to more news on that. 2022 is quite a long ways away, but the Gonzalez bill is something that could pass sooner. And again, we'll be updating folks as that starts to materialize. So with that in mind, the IEEE came out with a kind of a worldwide survey of CTOs asking about the technologies that they're going to be focusing on for 2021. And there's some of the things that we talked about on the show before, but I want to just reinforce that around the world, folks are focusing on things like artificial intelligence, which allows automation. One of those things that we said that you should definitely be focusing on in this time when you have this opportunity, these one-time funds. Automate some of those sort of laborious, paper, heavy processes that are in your district, old systems. Time to update those. So AI, 5G, and I know everyone's heard about a lot about 5G, but one of the interesting things about 5G is it's much easier to do a DIY, which is do-it-yourself version of a cell network than it used to be. 5G makes it easier and cheaper to do that. So we're seeing districts. We had Randy on, Randy Bassett from Fontana, talk about his project, which is a 5G Fontana citywide network. So that is cheaper. Folks are really kind of doubling down on investment in 5G because they want to control their own connectivity. And then the third piece is IoT. Remember, we told you about those old systems. The oldest thing in your network is the biggest weakness in your network because it very likely doesn't have security or very little security in it. So you really need to be thinking about Internet of Things. It's all those things that are connected to your network that could, introduce some risk. Once you really start to think about the old stuff, you can think about new ways to connect new things to the internet to improve your systems. And one thing that you mentioned before, Kevin, was let's just say temperature readers, right? And that's something that's connected to the network. Before, you had to do some sort of like manual scan. Now you're able to connect those things to the internet, and those are ways you can leverage IoT. So if you don't have any plans, you're not looking at those, you're not talking to your tech teams and your leadership teams about those technologies, that is what the top CTOs in the world are looking at and thinking of, and they can definitely help your district. So please take a little bit of time and invest in that. And then my final point today is there was a big news story this week about FireEye, one of the top cybersecurity firms in the world. They were hacked. They actually said they were hacked by a nation state, which is not a great thing when we have other countries sort of hacking big cybersecurity firms. But I'll just, broken record reiterate here. If you haven't taken measures for cybersecurity with your district and you're just hoping it's not going to happen to you, that's not going to work. And you need to take some measures to do so. So again, our friends at Site are out there with some great resources for you. Digital advisors, we do help districts with this particularly. So I'll just give ourselves a little shout out. And if there's something we can do to help you, let us know. But with that, Kevin, I just want to say you're going to do your governor's budget announcement in January. I know that's going to land on the website, but can you just reiterate any details that you have on that right now?
So again, we've got these planned out in at least 30 counties across the state. The field, all of our viewers that have participated in the past are used to this. You're going to be getting an invite both from your county superintendent and also Capital Advisors will put out links to you so that you can register for that conference. The budget workshops, the governor budget workshops will be held between the 19th and the 22nd of January. So we'll have a lot of really great detail and perspective for you on that. The other thing I did want to mention, Tim, that I'd forgotten to point out was that in the brand new session, probably the most controversial piece of legislation was introduced was this plan to mandate openings for school districts. It's kind of interesting because it would basically say, and there's a lot of frustration in the legislature that schools are not reopened for in-person instruction. It's interesting that every time we get a wave of interest in that issue, it corresponds to usually a peak in transmission rates. And so when we start to get control of this thing, people aren't talking about it so much. And then when it's out of control, people talk about how do we get back to reopening school. So the timing hasn't been perfect on this, but they have, if you take a look at the legislation that Phil Ting, the assembly member from San Francisco, has introduced, it's AB 10. It would basically say that, look, as long as you're not in purple, we want you, it's going to be required as of March 1st that you do provide in in-person instruction in one of the different ways that's allowed by law. I don't know how complicated really it would be to pull that off, because let's presume that you're not doing in-person instruction and you wanted to at least hit some minimum level under the law. You could do some small group instruction that you pull maybe kids with disabilities, certain types of disabilities, back to campus, and you would be in compliance with AB 10 if it were to pass. But it's an uphill battle for Phil Ting, because it would be an urgency bill. They got to get a 2/3 vote for any bill to be enacted, right away, which is they would be trying to enact that thing immediately within the context of this session before even the budget gets passed. So it's going to be hard if you don't have CTA support, which I don't know that they will be supporting this kind of legislation. Our friends in labor have been probably the biggest sticking point for most districts in returning to in-person instruction. So there's a lot to work out on this, but that bill is out there and I wanted to point it out.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, and just of course the natural push and pull between the families that might want to send their students and the families that might want to keep their students home. So like there's a lot, I can see a lot of tension there that they'd face on the way. But appreciate you bringing that up. And I wanted to say thanks again to everybody for checking in and tuning into this broadcast. We're looking forward to seeing you next week. And if you do get a chance, please like the videos in YouTube. We don't ask that in the little trailer, but if you can just click the little thumbs up, that'll definitely help us. We appreciate your support. So Kevin, thanks again. Lots of great info this week, and looking forward to chatting with you next week.
Great. So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.